In today's video, we're going to talk about how different length limbs or different length bows have different effects on both the way the bow feels as well as potential performance benefits. For those of you that are new here, my name is Kaminski. I'm a two-time Olympic silver medalist in the sport of archery, and we're going to make this channel a great resource to all types of archery. So if you haven't yet, hit that subscription button and the notification bell. That way you're notified every time a new video is uploaded. I'd appreciate it. So I've had this video requested a fair amount. You know, there's some people asking or mentioning things about long limbs versus short limbs, longer risers, shorter risers, overall limb length or overall bow length rather, and what that does and how that affects shooting in general. There are many ways that this change can affect the way that the bow feels, the way the bow performs, the way it fits you, and potentially how accurate it is, or mostly how forgiving it is. Although the accuracy and forgiveness is kind of hard to really quantify, but there is a general consensus out there in the archery community. So the first thing that you're really going to need to look at is the overall bow length itself. That is from tip to tip, regardless of the length of riser, regardless of the length of limbs, or the combination thereof. Now, in general, a longer bow will be potentially more forgiving. Now, this idea is kind of, well, it's not necessarily contested at all, but it is a general rule of thumb that a longer bow will be more forgiving. Why is that is a little difficult to really quantify. It's kind of difficult to say the exact reason why. I believe there are a few reasons that the longer bow length is more forgiving. Mainly is just what you can influence on the bow itself and the relative knock position, the string angle. In general, a shorter bow, when you make slight changes in your finger pressure on the string, that can affect the trajectory of the arrow pretty dramatically on a shorter bow than a longer bow. Mostly, in my opinion, is because of the string angle. This is a 25-inch riser with long limbs, and when I pull the bow back to full draw, the string angle where the string conforms to my fingers is relatively at a lower angle compared to a shorter bow. So this bow here is a 25-inch riser with short limbs. So this is a 66-inch bow and this is a 70-inch bow. So there's a big difference what the string angle here looks like when I pull it back to full draw versus what this string angle looks like when I pull it back to full draw. The difference between the two percentage-wise really isn't that big of a difference. It's just a few percentage points, but in archery, especially when you go to long distances, a few percentage points of consistency and performance makes a massive difference on the target or a massive difference on the scorecard. The main difference for me that is really important when selecting the correct bow length, regardless of the riser and limb length, is the string angle as well as the way that it feels on your hand and fingers. People who have a very long draw length will want to have a longer bow in general because the string angle, as you pull back more and more and more, gets more and more severe and it starts to pinch your fingers. You start to have difficulty keeping your arrow on the rest sometimes because your fingers are getting crunched together by the string. There's a lot of things that can cause issues there. But the main thing, in my opinion, is how it fits your face. People who have really long noses may like shorter bows. People who have really short noses may like longer bows. And the main reason is how the string angle fits your face while you're at full draw. So if I used a regular Olympic style recurve, split finger, anchor under the corner, or anchor under my jaw, if I anchor correctly and I have the string touching the corner of my chin and my head is in the correct position this direction, the string does not really touch my nose. This is again a 66-inch bow. The string is just off my nose that little bit. In order for me to get my string to touch my nose how I would like, I have to push my head down like this. And because that's not a natural head position, it's uncomfortable. It'll cause neck tightness over time, especially with high volumes of arrows being shot. And it just doesn't fit me. It's too short of a bow. So the way to solve that is to make your bow length longer. So this is again a 70-inch bow. That was a 66. And now I have string contact not just on the corner of my chin and my nose, but it also touches my lips a little bit too. So it's just more points for reference, and it's a lot more comfortable. Now if the bow is too long for me, I'm going to have to put my head down to over-exaggerate but the string would be smashing into my nose. Potentially my nose might be a longer nose, so you might go with a shorter limb to fit you better. So that's a couple different ways in how you can decide which overall length bow to use. You know, some other things that you can use is just overall draw length. If you're in that 28-inch draw length range, a medium set of limbs and a 25-inch riser, so a 68-inch bow would be pretty good. You know, anything over 29 inches and above, you're looking at least a 70-inch bow, potentially 72 if you can get a 27-inch riser if you're well over a 30-inch draw length. And in general, anything under like a 26.5-inch draw length, you're probably going to be shooting a 66-inch bow or shorter. You know, that general rule of thumb is just to kind of blend the difference between what I'm about to get into is speed and performance and forgiveness and more comfort. So the shorter you go with your bow, the more casting you're going to have. The more energy is going to be transmitted into the arrow because you're building up more stored energy into the limb, which is the bendable part. And when you let go of the string, it's going to transfer more of that into the arrow itself. So you're going to have a slightly faster setup. So if you have a relatively short draw length, I wouldn't shoot a 70-inch bow because you're not going to be able to reach 70 meters as easily as if you had a 66-inch bow. Now, many people out there are saying, but pretty much all the Koreans shoot a 25-inch riser and long limbs, a 70-inch bow, even if they're female with shorter draw lengths. Yeah, they definitely do. And they shoot a fair amount of arrows, so they shoot a relatively high bow weight for, you know, as far as like your average female is concerned, especially more of a recreational type archer or archers who aren't shooting on the world-class, you know, level. Reaching 70 meters can be a bit of a challenge for many different factors between the peep height, the draw length, the draw weight, and then bow sizing. All those things can add up to either really getting you out there at further distances or really hampering your ability to reach those further distances. So you might have a bit of an advantage over your opponents if you bumped up your speed from shortening your overall bow length. Now the reason that the bows actually get faster that way, some of it has to do with the stored energy in the limbs and the efficiency of the limbs, but also in general I found that a heavier string makes the arrow weaker, so you have to then lower your bow weight to compensate for the weakness, and therefore it slows your bow down. So you could say that a 68-inch bow versus a 70-inch bow, a 68-inch bow is faster because it has 2 inches less of string length, 2 inches less of weight on that string that is breaking down the spine of the arrow, and that's where you actually gain your speed, at least in my experience. Let's talk about risers and limb length combinations. Because this is a 70-inch bow, and it's a 25-inch riser and long limbs, I could make this a 70-inch bow with a 27-inch riser and medium limbs, so going down 2 inch shorter in limbs and going up 2 inch longer in the riser. What would that do? For me, I liked shooting the 27-inch risers and shorter limbs. In the 2012 and 2016 Olympics, I shot long risers and medium limbs. And previous to that, I was shooting long risers and short limbs when I had a draw length around a 28 3/4 inch draw length. What I really liked about shooting a longer riser and shorter limbs was that I felt like I was getting more out of the limbs, I was getting more out of the system, and the bow reacted in a way that I really, really liked. The bow didn't necessarily jump as hard, as much a dynamic jump, but the bow felt very efficient, very punchy. It felt like all of the energy that was in the actual system that I was storing at full draw was being transferred into the arrow, and it felt to me to be a bit more consistent and more accurate from an engineering standpoint. Now, when I'm talking about an engineering standpoint, I'm talking about this part, the riser, is designed to not flex, or it does flex actually, but they're supposed to be not really flexing, at least relative to the actual limb. The limbs are the flexible piece. So if I could take inches and length out of something that is flexing, and potentially flexing inconsistently from shot to shot, I thought that I could have more accuracy or more consistency with less material flexing in the actual system. So, I mean, I shot pretty good scores with shooting medium limbs and short limbs on a 27-inch riser, and I really, really liked it. When I switched to Win and Win, they didn't really have, at least in the newest stuff that they don't have 27-inch risers anymore, and, they just didn't have enough volume for it to make sense for them and Hoyt as well as a company to sell 27-inch risers. So I was forced to shoot a 25-inch riser and long limbs because I really wanted to shoot a 70-inch bow. As I got a little bit later in my career, my draw length increased just a little bit to just over 29 inches, and shooting that 68-inch setup was just really pinchy on my fingers, so I didn't use it. Now you'll say, yeah, most people use long limbs because they're supposed to be more forgiving. Why are they more forgiving? Honestly, it's very difficult to really put actual hard data into why that is the case. It's really almost near impossible to be able to do that. And it's just difficult because you can't shoot two bows at the same time and make the same exact mistake and see which arrow actually landed closer to the center. You know, you can try to make mistakes, you can pinch the nock, you can, add more index finger, add more ring finger pressure, and see if it actually influences the way that the bow performs or the deviation from the center that you're potentially trying to measure. But it's just so difficult. It's really almost near impossible to actually measure. And, the saying is, longer riser, longer limbs, longer bow is more forgiving. Again, the guessing is the string angle, the influence of percentage change when you make a mistake, things like that. It's just really, really difficult to measure. You get something really, really short, you get like an over-exaggeration. I grab my daughter's bow here. She, really wants to shoot far distances. As I pull the bow back, this string angle gets really, really aggressive. And so when I make changes here, it feels like it's going to make a big influencing effect on the way the arrow is going to fly. On that longer bow, it just doesn't have as much influence, or at least it doesn't feel like it has as much influence on the entirety of the system. If I was you and I was looking to buy a new riser, or a new limb, or a new riser and limb combo, I wouldn't necessarily look for forgiveness as the number one way to pick the riser and limb length combination. Don't be afraid to go outside the norm, and if you can get a 27-inch riser and shoot shorter limbs, you might like that feeling a little bit better than shooting the shorter riser and longer limb combination. There's definitely different opinions on this for everyone. Everybody likes to have their own opinions. Everybody thinks that, their opinion is the best. But I don't believe that there is a set-in-stone principle or a set-in-stone set of rules on when you should be picking different riser and limb length combinations. And I definitely would not be afraid to experiment, especially if you can afford it, or you can borrow somebody's equipment to play with. Now, the only thing that's really important to really take into consideration is the actual brace height in relation to the riser and limb length combination. In general, when you're shooting those longer risers and the shorter limbs, you want to make sure your brace height is set to those shorter limbs. You also want to make sure that you're using the correct string length itself, because as you go to a longer bow, you need a longer string as well to maintain proper twists in the string and proper brace height. Because all of those things, string twists, brace height, knocking point height, all of those things, everything relates so closely together and is so important to actual performance that I think that those things are probably more important to forgiveness, in my opinion, than the overall length of the system. If you have the correct brace height, the correct string length with the correct amount of twists, have your knocking point nailed, have your balance of your tiller nailed, all of those things in conjunction, if you have a really well-tuned system to work together, then I believe that that is going to be a way more forgiving setup than just buying a longer set of limbs or a longer riser. Now, if you're looking for a great resource on tuning and tuning for performance and tuning for forgiveness, I have a book here that I created. It's called Tuning for Performance. I break down every step on how I would take my bow out of a box and go to the Olympic Games and shoot and compete with it to represent my country and be comfortable with it and be happy with it. Every single step that I went through on how to tune and select and do everything is in this book here. It's available on my website, jkaminski.com. I'll put a link in the description below, plus a card at the top here. Also, I'll have Amazon links as well in case you're interested in picking the book up on Amazon. Hey, thanks for watching. If you like this video, consider hitting the subscription button and the notification bell, as well as the like button. I would appreciate it. Also, please consider supporting my channel if you head to my website, jkaminski.com. There'll be info and links on Patreon, apparel, books, and equipment sales, PayPal donate button, a P.O. box to send things to, and above all else, please share this video because there's no better advertising than word of mouth.